The United States holds a position of global influence largely due to its foreign policies. China is working to challenge this status, so it's crucial to pay attention to the foreign policy plans of potential presidential candidates, particularly regarding their stance on dealing with China. Currently, Vivek Ramaswamy is the second leading candidate in the Republican polls, with former President Donald Trump ahead. During a recent town hall event, he was questioned about his strategy for handling relations with China. He was saying that, "Let's discuss a game that China has been playing with the United States. For some time, we believe that exporting products like Big Macs and Happy Meals could help us spread democracy worldwide, a concept tied to global capitalism. However, China understood that we couldn't necessarily win this game. Instead, they realized that they could leverage their access to their market and their financial power to influence the US. In fact, they've even used our own money to shape our policies and behaviors, and it's been effective." This has resulted in prominent US companies openly criticizing their own country, while China implements carbon emission limits on US energy firms like BlackRock. China instructs Chevron and Exxon not to release carbon emissions domestically in the name of global climate change, while similar emissions are being produced on the other side of the world by PetroChina. It's interesting to note that one of the largest shareholders of PetroChina happens to be BlackRock, who are utilizing Chinese client funds to support these efforts. This dynamic is more akin to mercantilism than capitalism. He's an eloquent speaker, something we admire. Let's focus on his key points. For a politician at the young age of 38, he has a strong grasp of history, a quality that's not common in Washington, D.C. He begins by discussing a significant moment in history, the acceptance of China into the World Trade Organization, WTO. This decision played a crucial role in shaping China's modern identity, as reflected in its annual GDP growth rates. As VEC pointed out in his speech, the initial American expectation was that as China started importing American products, it would also adopt American values like democracy and capitalism. Bill Clinton, in a quote just before the congressional vote on China's WTO acceptance, stated, "By joining the WTO, China is not merely agreeing to import more of our products. It's also agreeing to import one of democracy's most treasured principles, economic freedom. When individuals have the power to not just dream but to realize their dreams, they will demand a greater say." For those unfamiliar with it, the WTO, or World Trade Organization, is a group where member countries agree to fair trade with each other. For China to join, it had to negotiate with all members, particularly the US, which was the world's leading economy. US officials believed they had negotiated a tough deal. This deal required Beijing to reduce tariffs, open up Chinese industries to foreign investment, and allow foreign banks more opportunities to do business in China. For over a decade, China also agreed that the US could block Chinese imports that posed a threat to specific American industries. In exchange for these concessions from China, the US simply had to give up its annual decision on whether to grant China most favored nation status as a trading partner, which meant full access to the American market. Many in the United States saw this as a way to create a world filled with free markets, free elections, and free people collaborating together, a reasonable assumption, especially considering success stories like South Korea and Taiwan, which overcame dictatorships as they grew more prosperous. After the trade deal, foreign investment in China skyrocketed from $47 billion in 2001 to $124 billion a decade later. Easing restrictions on imports encouraged multinational companies to enter the Chinese market, drawn by its enormous potential. China soon became the world's primary hub for manufacturing, and Chinese products flooded into the United States. However, things didn't turn out as expected by the deal's supporters. A study led by MIT economist David Autor found that Chinese competition cost the U.S. approximately 2.4 million jobs between 1999 and 2011, particularly affecting communities relying on labor-intensive industries. Furthermore, China didn't open up politically. Beijing controlled the internet by restricting its use to commerce, technology, and social media while suppressing political activities by intimidating and imprisoning critics. More recently, it has been used to identify and track dissidents. Despite its economic growth, China didn't fully adhere to its WTO commitments. It failed to allow foreign banks to operate in its local currency as promised. Many companies, particularly in aerospace and chemicals, have been pressured to share technology to do business in China, violating the pledge not to force such transfers. China also manipulated its advantage within the WTO, obstructing the export of vital materials required by high-tech industries and undervaluing its currency by 30% to boost exports, causing trade imbalances. While China had kept its strength concealed and bided its time diplomatically and militarily for years, recent times have seen a shift. Although China had always practiced mercantilism, a strategy aimed at enhancing its prosperity and power at the expense of other nations, it has become more pronounced in recent years. Capitalism is typically based on fairness, while mercantilism seeks to reap benefits without considering the consequences for others. For instance, China wants its companies to access the U.S. market freely and fairly, but American companies often face restrictions and unfair treatment in China. Notably, Facebook, YouTube, Google, and Twitter are all banned in China, while companies like Apple, Tesla, and Micron have faced intellectual property theft by Chinese firms. In fact, the IP Commission estimates that these thefts cost the U.S. economy a substantial $600 billion annually. The Chinese government is increasingly using its economic power to influence global behavior and promote its own authoritarianism. They use tactics like patriotic boycotts, shutting down websites, and other retaliatory actions. International companies and organizations are often pressured to avoid taking stances that the CCP disagrees with, such as supporting democracy in Hong Kong, acknowledging human rights abuses in Tibet and Xinjiang, or recognizing Taiwan's autonomy. Fashion brands like Zara and Hugo Boss have retracted statements related to their use of Xinjiang cotton. LinkedIn has blocked accounts of foreign journalists on its Chinese site. Some investors, like Ray Dalio, refrain from addressing human rights issues in China. They view China as being strict in managing its population. But this strategy has broader consequences than just censorship. China has tightened its legal requirements, forcing companies to hand over technology and data, jeopardizing user security and market integrity. For example, Apple censors apps in its Chinese App Store and stores encryption keys with Chinese state-owned companies. Amazon has shared cloud technology with local Chinese firms to meet Chinese regulations and continue operating. How can we address this? One proposed solution is to make a bold declaration, similar to the Declaration of Independence signed by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, which is one of the most significant mission statements in history. The idea is for the next president to sign a declaration asserting that the United States won't rely on an adversary for essential goods like shoes or smartphones. This approach would put pressure on China to align with fair trade practices, as it would hurt them more than it would hurt us. What's needed is a strong leader who has the courage to stand up for our country's interests. If we do this, we can encourage China to play by the same rules. Otherwise, we may need to declare independence and cut ties. Many other countries, such as India and Vietnam, are more than willing to step in as the world's manufacturing hub if China were to face disruptions for any reason. In fact, several companies have already started moving their production out of China to more favorable locations, and this trend is expected to continue. This doesn't mean China won't use exports as leverage in case of sanctions. It certainly will because it's a significant source of leverage. However, the manufacturing of inexpensive goods is replaceable. While companies and individuals may encounter short-term disruptions, they'll soon find alternative manufacturing sources. On the other hand, China has much more at stake in this trade, with over $500 billion in revenue coming from these exports for Chinese companies. Now, when it comes to the economy, things are interconnected. Every action has far-reaching effects. Remember, one person's spending is another person's income. So, if over 20 million people stop spending because they're out of work, it'll have a domino effect on other people's incomes, potentially leading to catastrophic consequences for the economy. These numbers aren't exact, but they give you an idea of the scale of the problem. The COVID-19 shutdown only exacerbated these problems, and the recent real estate crash in China has hit middle-class households the hardest. If there were ever an economic slowdown due to sanctions, middle-class Chinese citizens could pose a significant challenge to the authoritarian rule of the CCP.